After the Bach album, many things happened actually. With Bach, you actually expect controversy because everyone has their own Bach and they want it to sound like something they know before. The one surprise I had was, there was a little bit less controversy than I expected. Maybe that's a bad thing, but it was a wonderful reception. I was very I was a little bit nervous inside what the world would say, because I feel when you play Bach, you open yourself up in a way and you show your musical DNA. You show everyone how you think music on the deepest level, and if they reject it, it feels like they reject you, at the core. But in any case, I think it was wonderful to see the different reactions, from around the globe. And certain pieces really resonated with certain countries, and other pieces went to other countries, and it was extremely interesting. One of the songs was in the pop charts in Japan for like 12 to 30-year-old or something like that. It was an organ sonata transcription, and then other things, were really big in South America. So I was trying to understand how the world works through this album. Like, why that piece there and this piece there? Maybe it's a coincidence, but maybe there's something more to it. But I thought it also showed something about that composer, about Bach. He's so universal, and he's so sort of open and big in the way he thinks, that there's scope in his language for the whole world almost to relate to. Maybe the second album, because Bach was my second album for DG, is the most challenging album, especially if you have had, some success with the very first album. It's maybe the album that sort of defines your path a little bit. And I thought, the reason why I chose Bach is that it's very close to my heart. But also I thought if you do Bach, it opens up so many different directions, because the whole of music history after Bach is indebted to Bach. The success of this album was... I would say it was actually unexpected for me. I expected more controversy, to be honest, because I thought I was doing things that were quite different from some of the other versions of this music. But of course, it's lovely, And before the Bach album, I had never gotten an international prize, and then all of a sudden, I got like 4, I think. And but it also shows you something that the hardest thing is to get the first prize. But once you have like a prize, and then you have a certain stamp on you, and then maybe it's easier to get the second and third ones, And I think that has to be also remembered for all the young pianists who deserve, great prizes, that it sometimes takes patience. And in the end, it's not really about the prize, it's about the music. The prize doesn't change the way you play, and it doesn't make it easier to play. It can maybe make it even more difficult to play. So we'll see. But it was a very good year, and a somewhat unexpected one. I don't think about labels at all. I mean like musical labels. I'm not talking about Deutsche Grammophon. I'm talking about neoclassical or classical or even Baroque or Impressionism or jazz or rock or pop or whatever. It doesn't mean anything to me. All those stamps. They are completely outside of the music, and they are ways for us to categorize and simplify our lives in ways we shouldn't actually simplify our lives, because music is much more complex than that. So. And then, actually, if you read every single review you get, you might as well read every single YouTube comment or every single Facebook comment. Then you lose yourself. You become insane. So I did that after the Glass album. I was and then I saw, lots of love and also some hatred and all sorts of things. And with the Bach a little bit, but now I stopped. I can't deal with it. Life is too complex, and there's enough music to think about rather than taking all the noise of the internet. But I don't see myself in any other way than just being a musician, and hopefully a searching musician. I think right now we live in a great time, because people are less and less thinking in those kind of conservative and conventional lines. I think that's very much a late 20th century idea. And actually, if you think about the record stores that we no longer have, I miss them and I don't miss them. In a way, I miss the beauty of it. It's just like I love bookstores. What I don't miss is that they usually had like a classical section that was like caged away in a glass cage, and you go in and it's like totally like you're in some kind of a cult or like some clan or something like that. In a way, that's all changed now, and for the better. And I think what the streaming platforms have done is completely revolutionized the way we think about music, and they've erased very much the sort of superficial names we give musics. You know, doesn't tell me anything if you say I'm a classical artist or new classical artist. It means nothing. It was an experiment to give other people complete liberty with my recordings. It's almost like a composer who gives a performer his music and then just trusts him with it. So these fantastic artists, electronic artists and all sorts of artists who did these sort of fantasies with electronics, you know, they just took my recordings and then they completely reimagined them and did their own fantasy, and that was wonderful. And Bach, in a way, speaks to so many different musics. He speaks to so many different musicians, and you hear incredibly different people say, "Oh, Bach, my Bach, you know, I have to have Bach." So in a way, that was wonderful. But the rework, you know, that word is problematic. I mean, what we do, the whole artists who are sort of interpreting, you know, whether it's a musician or an actor who's doing Shakespeare or whatever, we are always reworking. You know, it's always a rework in a way, unless you're just writing the notes there and then, you know. Even when you have, like, I was just in the Concertgebouw hall with John Adams, the wonderful American composer, and we were doing his piano concerto. He wrote it in 2018. In a way, we are reworking that. Even if he's the composer and he's there on the podium, he's still reworking it. He's rethinking it on the podium for himself for that performance. It's all a rework. And I would even say that people who write new music are very often reworking, even if they think they're doing something completely new. You know, we can't escape history. We can't escape all the things that influence us. So even if you're completely original, there is a degree of rework. I believe that you have to escape your success. This is actually something that I learned from Claude Debussy. He said that, you know, if you have success with a composition or style, you should really escape it, because if you start trying to repeat and regenerate an old success, maybe you lose a sense of yourself. You lose a sense of creativity. You might lose the sparkle of invention. And I love that, you know, and I think we should think about that always when something goes well in music or in art or anything we do, you know, to make sure we don't just become slaves to that success and victims of it, because we should always be looking for new things. So in a way, my 3 albums to date, full albums, the first one is Philip Glass, which went quite well. Of course, if you have success, the easiest thing in a committee meeting is to repeat that success, and I completely understand that's how it works. And you have to I said that, you know, I have to do Bach. It's just, that's what my heart is telling me. It really needs to happen. It's Bach or nothing. And then, you know, we went with Bach, and that went very well. And then, you know, of course, then there's, let's do more Bach. And then you have to do something else. And so the French album that I've now done, the Debussy Rameau, that's sort of something that has been brewing in my mind for some time, but mostly in the last year or so. I wanted to do something that's, you know, has an element of surprise. So to put those guys together and really in a dialogue, so you go from one to the next, again to the next, you know, from one another, really in a dialogue format, is, I think, rather unusual, but I think it works quite well. I did a lot of research, but I didn't have time to read, you know, all the biographies. I mean, I have a good overview of their lives and their careers and their music. But I was particularly interested in the relationship of Debussy to Rameau. So that's what I really spent time on, you know. And because Debussy was so original in his view of art and other people. For instance, he didn't like much of Beethoven's piano writing. He thought it was awfully clumsy. So he had these kind of really strong opinions. I don't agree with him, but, you know, they're so interesting and strongly argued still. And so I was curious about why he loved Rameau so much. What was it, you know? And with Rameau as well, of course, we know much less about him than Debussy because he's further away in time and he wasn't the kind of celebrity that Debussy was, certainly. But we do know some things. We know that he had success really relatively late in life with his operas, much later than writing these piano pieces. He was a very modest man in a way. He was terribly tall, a little bit like me, too tall probably. There's a fantastic, I think it's a painting rather than a drawing of him, that I've seen, where his legs just seem to be endless. and supposedly he had, for instance, when he got finally some financial security and some wealth late in life, he didn't change his ways. He kept his very simple harpsichord. I think he had one pair of boots, very few clothes. And he was a generous man, So in a way, they also had that in common to some degree. Debussy, he found this also relatively late in life, financial security, and in a sense, recognition, He didn't just become the superstar until quite late. Your time, has yet to filter out the essentials and the less essentials, It's very interesting. My research was mostly then also just the music, because I really believe that when you create albums, it has to first and foremost come from the music. I mean, you can do very interesting historical research, but you can't create a good album just from putting historically interesting things together. It needs to come from the way they sound and the way they work in context. So with this album, I had probably, I'm not sure, 10 different versions. I did like these little playlists where I would just reorganize everything again and again and again and again, trying to find out what would make sense for me. And finally, I found what works for me. And I left out a lot of things. I recorded over 100 minutes of music, I think, or thereabout. So there were so many pieces I had to just there were a lot of darlings I had to kill. It was like a darling mass murder, That's what it has to be like. But that was my research. Of course, reading, but more importantly, listening and feeling. And I was thinking about Rameau really when I say it's an old passion, because I got to know his music when I was maybe 20 or 21, so I was not really a child. I came to it in my college years at Juilliard, and I heard this one recording that changed my life, Le Rappel des Oiseaux, or Dialogue of the Birds by him, and it was played by Emil Gilels, the great Russian pianist, as a young man actually. And it's a very beautiful recording. It's very different from how I play the piece today. It's slow and very melancholic, very sad birds. I just remember when I heard this. I remember the first time I heard it. I was just like, I just stopped everything I was doing. I just like, what is this music? Because it's unlike anything I had ever heard. It had so much fantasy, so much poetry, but also this kind of Baroque kind of clockwork rhythm and structure. And it in a one spot it sort of stops time completely, and it really triggered something in me. And I learned this piece, but I was then, like I said, at Juilliard I was a student, and I had all the other things and concerts I was preparing and exams and all the things, so I didn't really go much deeper into the Rameau world than that. I got to know a few of the famous pieces and I thought they were genius, but then somehow life takes you into different directions, and I was doing all these other things, all these other composers, different projects. And then finally last year, it came back to me, Rameau. He had been there the whole time. And then I just thought, now is the time. I was waiting for the birth of my son, my first child, Ólafur Magnús, and I was just having this impatient day because he was supposed to come 2 weeks before he came. And this was sort of on the day of his supposed arrival, but of course he didn't come. So I just started playing music, and I got the complete works of Rameau for the keyboard, and I just played from page 1 to the last page of the last book. It took me the whole day. But I found things in there which I could not believe. Just the quality and the poetry and the story, the narrative, and the piano writing, or the keyboard writing, I should say, and the variety. I think what really took me was the narrative. It's really a story that he's telling in each piece, and he tells it with such directness. And as I was playing those Rameau pieces, I started to think all the time about Debussy and the parallels I found in Debussy. And there are so many, in my opinion. And then I started to do some reading about Debussy and Rameau, because Debussy loved Rameau. I knew that, but I didn't really know to what extent. There's a piece called Hommage à Rameau by Debussy, which is at the end of my album, like an epilogue, like an afterthought. But I actually read that. I read a review that Debussy had written because he was a music critic into his 40s. A review about Rameau opera Castor and Pollux, and it's a beautiful review. And in one place there is a line that stayed with me. It says, "Rameau seems to be our contemporary." And of course there's almost 2 centuries between them in terms of when they're born. It's a long time. I really wanted to sort of make them contemporaries, to do an album that really makes it feel like they're like musical brothers, because I think very much they are. Debussy associated so much with Rameau, and I'm pretty sure, although you can't say that Rameau would have been much the same way to Debussy. The reason why I say it is because they are 2 people who had this relentless, independent, intellectual drive. They're kind of outsiders, you know. They do things their own way. They always find their own solutions. They ask their own big questions, and they never simply copy what, you know, their contemporaries are doing. They never accept things just because. It's never automatic. There's never a formulaic measure in Debussy, and I would say the same for Rameau. It's a surprise around every corner, which makes it so interesting to explore them. And I think sometimes with Debussy, we think of him in rather simplistic terms. You know, we tend to think of impressionism, which is a very problematic term for me. And we think about maybe, you know, whatever, water lilies of Monet or something like that. We think of this kind of blurred, sort of hazy, almost druggy way of seeing the world, right? But that only tells a fraction of the story with Debussy, because he was equally interested in Japanese art, Japanese prints and drawings and Japanese objects. He was interested in art of the past. He loved symbolist poetry of his time, and you know, and he loved also the pre-Raphaelite painters. He liked people like Dante Gabriel Rossetti, fantastic painter, and in a way, you know, with Debussy, he was really a man of the past, and he's of course now known as the guy who changed music history. He really changed the course of it. But in order to do something like that, you really have to know where you're coming from. So I want to show him, in a way, as a man whose deep roots are in the French Baroque. And on the other hand, I want to take Rameau and I want to show, if I can, how he was completely ahead of his time, and how so many of the things he invented and did in music could almost have been done 100 years later. And they have something in common. They are really painters in sound, and they are storytellers. There's so much theater in the music often, and they give their pieces very often these extremely evocative titles. The dialogue of the birds, I mean, just like, wow, that's already like a one-line, you know, poem. Rain in the Gardens from Debussy, or you have the Conversation of the Muses from Rameau, or you have, you know, The Girl with the Flaxen Hair of Debussy, and you know, even the titles are just like they're pure gold. But then the pieces really go on to tell that story, and I find there's something about the music that's so sensual. You know, there's something about the French that it's never only about listening. Somehow you feel it. You feel it on your skin. You feel it. You can smell it. You feel the scent. Or it's almost music for your taste buds and for your eyes as much as for your ears. There's this kind of like, it takes in all the senses, and I think those titles and the narratives do that to you. So what I've done is to do the album, like, it took me months to form it. I've done it sort of like almost like a composition in 28 parts, if you can say that. Or I spent so much time trying to figure out what comes after what, how does it work. So it's in 2 parts really, and it's almost like in 2 acts, as if you're going into the theater. So the album starts with like an overture, a prelude to a cantata of Debussy, which very rarely, if ever, has been recorded on the piano. Maybe 1 or 2 recordings, but hardly. But it's a masterpiece. It's one of those examples when we all just always look in the same different, 5 different pieces of a composer or 10, but there's so much there behind the scenes. There's so much in the treasure chest of Debussy that you can find. And this is one of those pieces. It's a transcription that he made himself of a young piece, a piece he made when he was very young, but he made the transcription much later in life. And the piece is actually inspired by Dante Gabriel Rossetti, the pre-Raphaelite. It's inspired by a poem and a painting by him, which is about the impossible conversation. The conversation between 2 lovers. One is on earth and and the lady is up in heavens, and they're trying to speak, and it's a gorgeous, gorgeous painting, but it's an impossible conversation. And in that way, it's a little bit like my album, an impossible conversation between guys who are separated by 200 years, and they're both dead, of course. But they're not dead. They are very much alive. The way I try to do it is that, when each piece by a composer ends and the next composer takes over, that there is somehow a bridge. That's how the album works. I wanted to blur the boundaries between the two men, but I'm not trying to do that by playing Rameau with a lot of pedal and doing it like impressionistic. And I'm not trying to make Debussy sound like a Baroque composer. I'm just showing how elusive it is with time, and how 180 years can be such a short period of time if you have two kindred spirits. I think I am, of course, inspired by both composer and I'm inspired by the fact that they didn't take things for granted, and they asked their own questions. I think that's what we should always try to do in music and in art and in life. Ask our own questions. Find out what are the questions that we are interested in, and then ask them, and then look for the answers. I think that's what can create things that then become very personal. They become yours because they are your questions and your answers. And I think that's what they did, Debussy and Rameau. There was a year in Debussy's life when he stopped writing, early in his life, when he was 20-something, in his 20s. And the reason why he stopped writing was because he felt that everything coming from his pen was too much like Richard Wagner. This is just about the time of, when Wagner is probably just passed. This is in the 1880s. And Wagner was like the overwhelming superstar, and all the composers, they were all under his shadow, his spell. But Debussy refused, of course. It's a beautiful, struggle for independence. That's what art is, And I think, you find it so strongly in these two composers. And it's a very French mentality, and it's something that I find so refreshing and sort of reinvigorating. I actually believe, as much as I love streaming platforms and use them, I do very much believe in the physical product, but only if every element of the physical product, a vinyl or a CD, if every element belongs to sort of the same ideology, that is the ideology of the album, that is the concept of the album. And I think that, the graphics of the visuals of the album really have to speak directly to the music. It should be a direct result of the music, not just a nice photo shoot somewhere in a nice location in a nice staircase somewhere, like so many people do, or find a brick wall and try to pretend that you're not super cold standing outside, I think you have to find, the visual sort of equivalence of what you're thinking about in sound when you're doing it. And so what we did, I think of both of these guys as painters in sound, and I think of them as kind of it again, like it's music for the imagination. It's music. It's fantasy. And what you try to do when you play the piano or play an instrument, you try to get this kind of idea of almost like colors coming from your fingers or into the piano and translate it into sound. It's this kind of Gesamtkunstwerk idea. So what we did was simply to have a transparent, non-reflective glass. And then, this wonderful, the colors, that I would just dip my hands into, and then I would just paint and do all sorts of patterns. And as it happens, of course, you have 5 fingers, and those are like the 5 lines in the music stuff, So it becomes, in my 2 hands, almost, what I was thinking, kind of like the 2 composers almost just having their own colors and their own, but still somehow on the same wavelength. And I think also with albums, you have to, the artist should, if possible, write his own texts or be heavily involved in the content of the texts. So I chose for this album, for instance, to share a lot of things, more things than I've ever shared before, in the text that I wrote with my wife as well, who's such a big part of everything I do. I think everything from the type of paper you use in the album and the booklet to the actual the cover look and to the graphics on the CD and everything, it just needs to feel like a microcosmos. It has to feel like a little world. And those albums are the ones that I like. And then you can, when you feel like that, it's like with Cecilia Bartoli, like her albums are like this. I look very much up to that kind of way of making albums. I mean, I deeply respect her because each one you can, you associate a whole world with it. It's so beautiful. So it's not just another release that you send out every year or every year and a half or 2 years. It should be a little world that you try to create, and then you just let it go and go on to the next thing. The beautiful thing about now is that nobody knows what to do. Nobody knows. We're so early in the streaming. We're early in the internet even. It's only been 25 years of the internet as a mainstream thing. And for streaming platforms, I mean, this is like 10 or 15 years. It's so recent in history. I mean, we have no idea. We don't even understand how recent it is. We have no idea what the implications are. Nobody knows where we're going, people hardly know where we even came from. We're just somewhere in the music industry, and we're trying to understand how people listen and why they listen and what because it's a completely new way of listening. So different from getting a CD and putting it in your player, the streaming platforms, But now I think more and more of them are considering adding actually more, so it's not just a streaming platform, but you have more like the visuals, and I hope for that to happen in the future. That is not just like a little catalog and you just press this and it's just this tiny thing and it's the whole album. No, I wish for the album it would then just like open up a beautiful world on the screen in front of you, and it would be a little bit more than just just to press play and listen to the sound files. But really, I think it's interesting. There is no strategy. Nobody has a strategy, and that's why it's a really, really fun time to create albums. I'm touring this album for 2 years, I guess. So my life is a little bit always maybe keeping 2 albums alive. So I'll keep doing some Bach, but I've done so much Bach around the whole world. So I love it, but now I want to go somewhere else. And I'm doing, this in really, really many places, and I'm really looking forward to it. I'll do this kind of 1 hour long first half with Debussy and Rameau in one dialogue without a break. And after the intermission, I play a short second half because the first half is quite long. And that is the Mussorgsky Pictures at an Exhibition with a lot of elements from the Horowitz transcription and also my own elements. So it's all about images and sound. Some of the places will also be interesting debuts for me. Like I'll be playing it for my Carnegie Hall debut, this new album repertoire. We're taking it. I mean, I'm doing it everywhere from the big cities in America to Tokyo to Australia to I think South America. I wanted to go as far as possible. Of course, also here in Germany, where I feel so at home always. And certainly in France, I'll be playing it, in Paris and many other places. I will be playing this music for 2 years now, and the beautiful thing is that I don't really need to repeat myself. There are so many possibilities inside the music to play it differently. So, I mean, there are some things I particularly look forward to. My Carnegie Hall debut is with this repertoire, but I'll be taking it to basically all the different corners of the world, the major cities, of course, in Europe and America, but also a lot to Asia and to Australia for my debut in Australia. And I'm really excited also because, Rameau certainly deserves it, and Debussy as well. But Rameau, I hope, will be a novelty. It'll be a new thing, and I hope a discovery for the people who hear it. It deserves to be played a lot more. It should be played by, the young pianists of this world. It should be done in the conservatories. It should be done everywhere, not just in France. It deserves it. There's now a point in my life that I need to recalculate my time. I'm a father now to a guy who's almost 1 year old and, of course, a husband. I travel so much for my music, and I've decided to step down from my 2 festivals in Sweden and in Reykjavik and just give it a break. Also because I'm doing residencies. I'm artist in residence currently at the Concerthouse, and I will be at the South Bank Centre next year in London, and then another one I can't even talk about, and the one after that. And so in a way, you have to pick and choose, and now is the time for me to play solo concerts and to try to be a father. But I think also recording, an album like this that I've done, it requires so much time I think it's more time than people imagine. Not just deciding the music and playing all the things that you don't end up recording, all the research that then is not even used. And then you record it and it's, what it is, and then you write a text. But this is a process that can take months or years even. So if you want to do that, you can't have it all, So, and time is limited, and it's important that everything you do to the fullest, and you find that you're not just doing it for the sake of doing it. You're doing it because there is a deep conviction. And so now is the time, I guess, for me to record, to play concerts, and to be with my family. By nature, I am optimistic, and I believe in life, and I believe in people. And I think that's good, because it's very easy to go into the other way and to stop believing in life and in people. But I find that there are so many good people, and there's such privilege I have to get to meet all these people and to play for them and to work with them on projects. It's a very good life, even if it's extremely tiring at times. It's still something that I would not exchange for anything else.